mentioned a couple times now the continuous glucose monitor. It's something I'm a big fan. I'm actually wearing one right now, and I just like to, as a healthy person, see where my glucose spikes and how my body's reacting to different foods. Because something we could get into is everybody as an individual is going to react differently to the same foods. But what I want to talk about first for people that are tuning in right now and they haven't used this technology, talk about how it works specifically with your phone and what you see in real time to be able to apply these changes to your diet to impact your glucose.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to preface this by saying, so I've worn a glucose monitor for, many years now, and I've used the data from it to illustrate the scientific studies that talk about glucose. But in order to get the benefits, you don't need to wear one. They're expensive still, and they're still in early stages of developing in terms of being a really general public device. The data is still difficult to understand if you don't have the context. And so you can get a lot of the benefits by applying the hacks and not necessarily wearing one yourself. But when I wore one and when somebody wears one, what you can really see is how when you eat, let's go to one of the hacks actually. If you eat a meal that contains vegetables, proteins, fats, and starches. And if you eat that meal in one order or another order, you'll see a very different glucose spike happening on your glucose monitor. And that's, one of the really cool hacks that I share. And the right order to eat your food in is vegetables first, proteins and fats second, and starches and sugars last. And if you do it this way, you can curb the glucose spike by 75%, which is super easy and incredibly valuable. And then to your question about personalization, I just want to touch on that because I think it's really interesting. A lot of people have asked me that, isn't it true that bodies react differently and you can't really draw any general conclusions? And actually, the science shows us that these hacks, these principles, they work in every single one of us. And if you want to go a step further and figure out, for you, maybe this particular type of cookie versus that type of cookie will have a different response in your glucose. That's totally fine. But you're going to get at the 20% of variability between people. The 80% of how to keep your glucose level steady is by applying these very straightforward principles that work in everybody. Did that answer your question? Sorry, I went on a tangent.
There's a lot of good stuff in there. But what I want to highlight is what you said there at the end where, the principles that we're going to get into and have been touching on are going to work for everybody in a general sense, but we still have the individual variability. And why I get into that is because you share a story in the book. A friend of yours and yourself, you both had, it was either ice cream or a cookie.
Both.
And you had, or both together, and you had a big glucose spike when you looked at your CGM, and she had one on as well, and she didn't have the same spike. So again, we could apply what we're going to talk about to both you guys in that scenario and bring the glucose spike down, but you're still going to have more of a reaction to that food versus her to the same food.
Yeah, and it can be due to so many things, Jessie. It can be due to your hydration level, how much muscle mass you have, what part of your menstrual cycle you're in, how hydrated you are, how stressed you are, how rested you are, your microbiome. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And we're just scratching the surface for sure.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
90% of the population has glucose spikes every day without knowing it. And so I dove into the research and I discovered that actually there were things I could do, principles I could use that would allow me